What is the story cone? That is a great question. The short answer is it is a diagram for analyzing stories. For the long answer, we need to get into the video. First and foremost, the story cone was created by a woman named Katie Farmer after years of researching and analyzing stories of all types. She developed what we now call the story cone method, which is kind of fun because it looks like an ice cream cone. Let's dive right into how the story cone works. Let's talk about the primary roles of the story cone. So I have them drawn out here. First off, we have PA, which stands for the primary actor. This is basically the main character, the character who the story is about. For this example, I'll be using Harry Potter, so your primary actor is, you guessed it, Harry Potter. Next up, you have your central viewpoint character. This is the character whose point of view is telling us the story. So again, it would be Harry Potter as well. Now, if you're getting confused, it is very common in the story cone method for a single character to fill up multiple roles on the story cone. Then jumping down here, we have the PNB, which stands for the primary norm breaker. This is the rule breaker of the story. Once again, this character in Harry Potter would be Harry Potter. Now we're going to jump up to the top of our diagram. This is SYS, short for system character. This is the character who holds a lot of power in the world that the story is about. So in Harry Potter, this would essentially be Voldemort. Other systems can exist like the Wizarding World, like the staff at Hogwarts, because they hold power, but the main power figure in Harry Potter is Voldemort. Then we're going to jump over here to our NCC, or our Noise and Chaos Creator. Now this is basically the character or group of characters that create the most disruption in a story. You could also put Voldemort here. All of the chaos can be directly led back to him, or you could even put the Death Eaters here as the Noise and Chaos Creator. Now let's move to this piece of the diagram right here. This is the IED, or the Initial Equilibrium Disruptor. Basically, it's the inciting incident. This is when Hagrid comes knocking down Harry's door and says, "You're a wizard, Harry." This is the moment when Harry's life is changed. You can also argue that part of the IED as well is when Voldemort antagonizes Harry and his life first by murdering his parents and trying to murder him as well. That is something that we call in the story method like a 1-2 punch. It's an IED that has multiple parts to it. Next up in our diagram, we have H, which basically stands for hero. It's the hero of our story. It's the guy that we're rooting for, the person we want to see win. In different story types, it might not always be the person you are rooting for, but we'll get to that later. And then within hero, there are 3 different types of heroes. So for the 3 different hero types, we have first off the traditional hero. This in the Harry Potter story would be Harry Potter. Another example of a character who is a traditional hero would be Superman. The next up we have is a romantic hero. I don't have a great example of this in Harry Potter, maybe Snape, but a great example of this in Pride and Prejudice would be Mr. Darcy. He sacrifices his status here to be with his one true love, so he would be classified as a romantic hero. And then you have a rogue hero. A rogue hero, in essence, is a hero who only cares about saving their own skin. But we sort of forgive them for their selfishness because they're usually written or portrayed in a really charming way. A good instance of this would be Han Solo. He's clear from the get-go that he's only out for his ship, his crew, his own interests. But then we warm up to him over time, or actually he's quite charming in the beginning. So those are all the primary roles. Now we're going to move on to secondary roles. First off, we would have characters that are aligned with the primary norm breaker. So since in Harry Potter, our primary norm breaker is Harry, his allies would be Ron, Hermione, Lupin, Sirius. Anyone who is most definitely on Harry's side would be allied with him. So they would be aligned with the primary norm breaker. So of course, if you have characters aligned with the primary norm breaker, you're going to have characters aligned with the system. So another example of secondary characters aligned with the system would be Bellatrix, the Malfoys, the Death Eaters, anyone who's definitely like on Voldemort's side of the conflict. And then finally, you have the safe character. Now, the reason why the safe character is here on the diagram is because they don't get to necessarily be a rule breaker all of the time. They still have to play by the rules of either the most powerful system or other systems in play, but they show up to support the primary norm breaker at different story beats. So for instance, in the very beginning, this would be Hagrid. He's a very safe, comforting character, but then very quickly for the rest of the series, it becomes Dumbledore. Now, a full and complete story doesn't need to have secondary roles. It can be complete on its own with just the primary roles, but you will notice that a world will feel more immersive if you do have these secondary roles in it. And then it will feel more like a whole entire world if you then have tertiary characters. Tertiary characters or roles basically is the extras in the background. It's the people that fill the world. Maybe they're not aligned, maybe they don't fall in any particular spot on the diagram, but maybe they're a plot device, maybe they serve a purpose to the story or a red herring, but they fill the world and they make it feel more real to us. Now, if you're a fan of 3 plot point structure and you want to incorporate this into the story cone method, you can. It looks a little bit different on this diagram, but for instance, your rising conflict or the ascension of the story basically is this through line right here. This is what we call in the story cone method the axis of antagonism, which is basically just fancy word for conflict. This is the main theme of the story. This is the push and pull, the tug of war between the system and the primary norm breaker. Now, if you want to basically define the story climax, that would be in your hero moment right here. Right here, when we have the hero action, it defines the kind of hero that they are. That's your climax of the story. So that's your second plot point. And then when you have your descending action, this is this line up here. So W represents world. So this is basically how this story affects us as the reader or the viewer or the consumer of the story. It's what sets the emotional tone of the story. And in the emotional tone, you want the audience to leave with a certain feeling that you're trying to deliver by the end of the story. And that will define your story types. So next part of the method is that we have the story types. Now, important distinction. These are not genres. These are story types. So this is the type of story. It's going to leave you with an emotional signature at the end of it. So I know that they'll read like genres, but don't think of them as genres because obviously we don't have everything up here like sci-fi, horror, high fantasy, because genres can almost be an endless list. Think of this as the 4 different emotional signatures a story will leave you with or should leave you with if a story is done correctly. So first off, you have drama. This is your typical good versus evil, push and pull, 2 opposing forces, good guy wins. Then you have a comedy. This is and obviously don't think of the genre comedy because system characters will lose in genre comedies all the time, but a comedic emotional signature will basically, the rules that it follows is every role wins. System character, primary norm breaker, hero, CVC, all of those guys win, and then we win. And then with a tragedy, the system wins, but the primary norm breaker loses. And another important piece of a tragedy is the primary norm breaker needs to incite the inciting incident, the IED that we talked about. They need to be the cause, the catalyst of it. In most stories like dramas, the system will antagonize first, like Voldemort killing Harry Potter's parents. But in a tragedy, usually a way that you can pick up like, oh, this is going to end badly is if the character starts their own story by picking the fight first. It's okay if they end the fight, but if they start it, it usually is going to go badly for them. And then you have satire. Now, satire usually leaves the audience with a feeling of discomfort or even disgust. Usually, this one, the system loses and the primary norm breaker wins, but the way that they win is usually information about the norm breaker is revealed that makes us not want to root for them anymore. A good example of this would be The Secret Window with Johnny Depp, and I won't spoil it for you, but basically a lot of your plot twist type of films or books will fall into satire, and it will leave you with a feeling of unease at the end. So to further illustrate different story types, we're going to cite specific examples. So for a drama, for instance, like Lord of the Rings, we win, the hero wins, Frodo, who is breaking all of the rules to get to Mordor, wins, Sauron loses, the One Ring is destroyed, we shout hooray. In a comedy like Groundhog Day, there's not really bad guys and good guys. There's a guy who's really arrogant who needs to learn a lesson, but ultimately we win, the system wins, he wins. It's kind of a good vibe all around. A lesson is learned, we come away with it with an overall happy feeling. And then in a tragedy like Hamlet, for instance, we lose, or often in tragedies, you might lose and it's bittersweet, so you feel like you gained something. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to hate the story or the film, but you experiencing it via the character, you lose when the character loses and the system is affirmed and the system wins. And a lot of times in tragedies, this tragedy will actually be told through someone else's eyes. So the CVC in Hamlet is not actually Hamlet, it's his friend, because when Hamlet dies, it's like we die if he's the one telling us the story. So instead, to sort of give the audience a buffer, we tell the story through someone else's eyes. In tragedies, that happens a lot, not all the time, but a lot. And my finger is erasing over here. But in a satire, again, I'm going to use Secret Window because it's just such a good example. We lose, even if you feel like you liked the movie, it's supposed to put you at unease, kind of give you that weird feeling that a lot of horror movies would give you, movies with twists. The system loses, the character played by Johnny Depp wins. He has his hero moment, but there is a big secret revealed, even if you can see it coming from a mile away. It's supposed to be a big reveal, and it's sort of a twist where he wins, but we kind of still lose because we're not sure if we wanted him to win. So those are the different story types with a little more depth and illustration to them. So why use the story cone? There are so many different forms of analysis out there, and I think that they are all great. Well, maybe not all, but most of them are great. There's a lot of like 3 plot point structure, and there's a lot of tropes that are out there that are really good for using on story analysis. But why do I love the story cone method so much? The reason why I love the story cone method is because it transcends media or mediums. So if you're analyzing a film, it's easier if you're a cinematographer or have been a director or understand the filmmaking process. If you are analyzing a book, it's easier if you're an editor or a publisher or you've been writing for a long time. The story cone method kind of wipes all of that away. It sort of erases the boundaries of what you can analyze because it's just focusing on the story. And according to the story cone method, a story is made up more so by characters that fill in the plot, if that makes sense. And as long as you can plot them out on the story cone, you can understand the emotional signature that the story was trying to convey. And this can also be really helpful for storytellers or creators that want to convey a message through story. And a lot of times we'll see blockbuster movies or long anticipated books come out and then flop. And a lot of times people are leaving the theaters or coming away from a book disappointed. And a lot of times that is because they were writing a drama, but they had a comedy ending. Or they were writing a satire, but they had a tragic start. Or something like that. Something did not hit quite right. And with the story cone method, you can actually map it out on a diagram and see where a story went wrong or where a story went really, really right. And this is great because it's a roadmap. If you are a storyteller and you want to give that comedic signature in your story, then you know that your system needs to win, your hero needs to win, your primary norm breaker needs to win. We need to come away feeling like that was a great time. And not, again, not the genre of comedy, but if you want to have that emotional signature of the audience winning in the end. So this is really great because it's just, if there's a beginning, a middle, and end, characters, and enough immersiveness in the story to pull you in, you can use this method, whether it's a movie or a book or a play, anything. I've even used it on songs before that have a beginning, middle, and end. And you can analyze a story and see the different story beats on a whiteboard, sort of plotted out. The 3 plot point structure does this really well too, but what I like is that this goes a little more in depth. That's why the story cone method is so great and why I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe to my channel. And if you have an idea for what I should talk about next, then leave it in the comments and I will see you next time.